Okay, here's part two of our two-part video series on Taketori Monogatari. If you haven't watched part one of this series, go ahead and watch that first. And I give some study questions and introductory information about the work, which was written in the early 10th century, so in the first half of the Heian period. Watch that, and then I recite excerpts from Donald Keene's translation in that video, and then in this video I'll read some excerpts from the second half of the story, Donald Keene's translation. And the version that you have, the PDF file that you have, has the original Japanese, classical Japanese, alongside Donald Keene's English translation, and we'll read both in class, along with a Gendai Goyaku, a contemporary Japanese translation of the work too, because the classical Japanese is fairly difficult for contemporary Japanese students these days. All right, here is the some excerpts from the second half of the story. And again, this is not the full story. This is just excerpts. It's an abridged version of the story. All right, for Donald Keene's full translation, I'll provide the link to that in the description below, and it's available on JSTOR. All right, here are more excerpts from the second half. The Imperial Hunt. The emperor, learning of Kaguya Hime's unrivaled beauty, said to a maid of honor, Nakatomi no Fusako by name, "Please go and discover for me what kind of woman Kaguya Hime is, this beauty who has brought so many men to ruin and refuses to marry." Okay, so you remember that the five suitors, the initial suitors, all failed at trying to win her hand in marriage, and she saw through their ploys, and one died, and so forth. And then the sixth suitor arrives here. It's the emperor, and ultimately he is semi-successful. Okay, so he says to the maid of honor, "Please go and discover for me what kind of woman she is, this beauty who has brought so many men to ruin and refuses to marry." And Fusako, obedient to his command, departed. Okay, this is one of the another character that appears on the scene here. Nakatomi no Fusako is a maid of honor. Remember that name, underline it, make a note of it. Fusako, obedient to his command, departed. When she arrived at the bamboo cutter's house, the old woman deferentially showed her in. The maid of honor said, "I have been ordered by His Majesty to ascertain whether Kaguya Hime is as beautiful as people say. That is why I am here now." So the emperor hasn't met her at this point. He's inquiring about her and is interested and wants to learn more about her. "I shall tell her," said the old woman, and went inside. "Please," she urged Kaguya Hime, "hurry out and meet the emperor's messenger." Kaguya Hime replied, "How can I appear before her when I am not in the least attractive?" So again, we see humility is one of the virtues and qualities of Kaguya Hime. "Don't talk nonsense. Do you dare to show such disrespect to someone sent here by the emperor?" "It doesn't make me feel especially grateful to think the emperor might wish to summon me," answered Kaguya Hime. She showed no sign of relenting in meeting the lady. The old woman had always considered Kaguya Hime as being no different from a child she had borne herself, but when the girl spoke so coldly, it much embarrassed her, and she did not reprimand Kaguya Hime as she would have liked. The old woman returned to the maid of honor and said, "I must apologize, but the girl is terribly obstinate and refuses to see you." The maid of honor said, "I was ordered by His Majesty to verify her appearance without fail. How can I return to the palace without seeing her? Do you think it proper for anyone living in this country to be allowed to disobey a royal command? Please do not let her act so unreasonably." She intended these words to shame Kaguya Hime, but when the latter was informed, she refused all the more vehemently to comply. So she's refusing even the emperor. "If I am disobeying a royal command, let them execute me without delay," she declared. The maid of honor returned to the palace and reported what had happened. The emperor listened and said merely, "You can see she's quite capable of causing the deaths of a great many men." He seemed to have given up all the thought of summoning Kaguya Hime into his service, but he still had his heart set on her and refused to accept defeat at her hands. He sent for the man and stated, "I want this Kaguya Hime you have at your place. Word has reached me of the beauty of her face and figure, and I sent my messenger to look her over, but she returned unsuccessful, unable to obtain so much as a glimpse of the girl. Did you bring her up to be so disrespectful? The old man humbly replied, the girl absolutely refuses to serve at court. I am quite at a loss what to do about her, but I'll go back and report your majesty's command. The emperor asked, why should a child you have raised with your own hands refuse to do what you wish? If you present the girl for service here, you can be quite sure I will reward you with court rank. The old man returned home overjoyed. He related the conversation to Kaguya-hime, concluding, that was what the emperor told me. Are you still unwilling to serve him? Kaguya-hime answered, I absolutely refuse to serve at the court. If you force me, I'll simply disappear. It may win you a court rank, but it will mean my death. Never do such a dreadful thing, cried the old man. What use would position or rank be to me if I couldn't behold my child? But why are you so reluctant to serve at the court? Would it really kill you? If you still think I am lying, send me into service at the court and see if I don't die. Many men have showed me most unusual affection, but all of them in vain. If I obey the emperor's wishes, no sooner than he expresses them, I shall feel ashamed how people will consider my coldness to those other men. The old man replied, I don't care about anyone else. The only thing that disturbs me is the danger to your life. I report that you are still unwilling to serve. He went to the palace and informed the emperor. In humble obedience to your majesty's command, I attempted to persuade the child to enter your service, but she told me that if I forced her to serve in that palace, it would surely cause her death. This child was not born of my body. I found her long ago in the mountains. That is why her ways are not like those of ordinary people. The emperor commented, she must have a transformed being. So again, this transformed being, henge, I think is what the original says. She must be a transformed being. There's no hope then of having her serve me, but at least I should like somehow to get a glimpse of her. I wonder how this could be arranged, said the old man. The emperor said, I understand, Miyako Maro, your house is near the mountains. How would it be if, under pretext of staging an imperial hunt, I stopped by for a look at her? That is an excellent plan, said the old man. If your majesty should happen to call at a time when she does not expect a visitor, you can probably see her. The emperor at once set a date for the hunt. During the course of the hunt, the emperor entered Kaguya-hime's house and saw there was a woman so lovely she shed a radiance around her. He thought this must be Kaguya-hime and approached. She fled to the adjoining room, but the emperor caught her by the sleeve. She covered her face, but his first glimpse was enough to convince him that she was a peerless beauty. I won't let you go, he cried. But when he attempted to take her away with him, Kaguya-hime declared, if I had been born on earth, I would have served you. But if you try to force me to go with you, you will find you cannot. The emperor said, why can't I? I'll take you with me. He summoned his palanquin, but at that instant Kaguya-hime suddenly dissolved into a shadow. The emperor realized to his dismay and disappointment that she was indeed no ordinary mortal. He said, I shall not insist any longer that you come with me, but please return to your former shape. Just one look at you and I shall go. Kaguya-hime resumed her original appearance, so she's transformed herself. She's capable of metamorphosis, we see there. The emperor was still too entranced with Kaguya-hime's beauty to stifle his feelings, and he displayed his pleasure with the old man for having brought about the meeting. Miyako Maro, for his part, tendered a splendid banquet for the emperor's officers. The emperor was bitterly disappointed to return to the palace without Kaguya-hime, and as he left the bamboo cutter's house, he felt as though his soul remained behind. After he had entered his palanquin, he sent this verse to Kaguya-hime. The emperor was bitterly disappointed, and as he left the bamboo cutter's house, he felt though his soul remained behind. After he entered his palanquin, he sent this verse to Kaguya-hime. Okay, so here's the verse from the emperor. Kaeru sa no miyuki mono uku omoete, somukite tomaru Kaguya-hime yue. As I go back to the palace, my spirits lag. I turn back in hesitation because of Kaguya-hime, who thwarts me by staying behind. To this, Kaguya-hime wrote the following waka in reply. Mugura hau, shita ni mo toshi wa henurumi mo, nanika wa tama no utena o momimu. How could one who has spent her years growing beneath these weeds dare to look upon a jeweled palace? The emperor felt there was less reason than ever to leave when he saw this poem, but since he could not spend the night with Kaguya-hime, he had no choice but to return. When he saw again the palace ladies who usually waited on him, they seemed unworthy even to appear in Kaguya-hime's presence. Indeed, the very ladies he had always considered more beautiful than other women, when compared to Kaguya-hime, seemed scarcely worthy of the name of human beings. He ceased visiting his consorts, finding no pleasure in their company. He wrote letters only to Kaguya-hime, and her answers were by no means unkind. He used also to send her poems attached to flowers or branches that struck him as especially attractive. Okay, so let us see in the following remaining pages of the story if he is able to win her heart through letter correspondence. Next section, the celestial robe of feathers. The celestial robe of feathers is in the Japanese, the hagoromo. Right, this is a very important article of clothing and sort of motif that appears quite often in classical Japanese literature. In no plays, there's a famous no play called Hagoromo, and it appears also in the Baijōi Chanhanga poem, this Never-Ending Sorrows, the Song of Never-Ending Sorrows, famous poem by Baijōi, the Chinese Tang Dynasty poet, the story about the emperor and Yang Guifei, and this story, of course, was imported in Japan and became sort of a foundation for subsequent Japanese culture and much of subsequent Japanese culture and literature. And this article of clothing appears in that poem, and it appears here as well. So this is the celestial robe of feathers section. They passed some 3 years in this way, each consoling the other. Okay, so for 3 long years, they correspond only by letters. At the beginning of the next spring, Kaguya-hime seemed more pensive than usual as she watched the moon rise in all its splendor. Someone nearby admonished her, "People should avoid staring the moon in the face." But when no one was around, Kaguya-hime would often gaze at the moon and weep bitterly. At the time of the full moon of the 7th month, she sat outside, seemingly lost in thought. Her maidservants informed the bamboo cutter, "Kaguya-hime has always looked with deep emotion at the moon, but she has seemed rather strange of late. She must be terribly upset over something. Please keep an eye on her." The old man asked Kaguya-hime, "What makes you look so pensively at the moon?" She answered, "When I look at the moon, the world seems lonely and sad. What else would there be to worry me?" Okay, keep in mind the question I had on the study guide questions about the moon. What is the moon a sort of symbol for? And it could be read as kind of the world beyond, the other side, the Mukogawa of Buddhism, right? The Higan, or Kigan rather. The world outside of this world of suffering and bonno, passions and desire and death and so forth, right? The world beyond attachments. Okay, what else would there be to worry me? He went over to Kaguya-hime and looked at her face. She definitely appeared melancholy. He asked, "My dear one, what are you thinking of? What worries you?" "I am not worried about anything, but everything seems so depressing." "You shouldn't look at the moon," the old man said. "Whenever you do, you always seem so upset." Okay, so the old man who adopted her adoptive father, does not realize yet that she actually comes from the moon, and he's about to find that out. "How could I go on living if I didn't look at the moon? Each night as the moon rose, she would sit outside immersed in thought. On dark, moonless nights, she seemed to emerge from her reverie, but with the reappearance of the moon, she would sometimes sigh and weep. Her maids whispered to one another, 'There really does seem to be something disturbing her.' But no one, not even her parents, knew what it was. One moonlit night, toward the middle of the 8th month, Kaguya Hime, sitting outside, suddenly burst into a flood of tears. She now wept without caring whether or not people saw. Her parents, noticing this, asked in alarm what was troubling her. Kaguya Hime answered, still weeping, I have intended to tell you for a long time, but I was sure I would make you unhappy. So sure that I would make you unhappy that I have been kept silent all this while. But I cannot be silent anymore. I will tell you everything. So here she confesses that she is actually from the moon. I am not a creature of this world. I came from the palace of the moon to this world because of an obligation incurred in a former life. Okay, so Buddhist element here with this reference to rinne, or reincarnation, transmigration of the soul. Incurred in a former life. Now the time has come when I must return. On the night of the full moon, people from my country will come for me, and I will have no choice but to go. I was heartbroken to think how unhappy this news would make you, and that is why I have been grieving ever since this spring. She wept copiously. The old man cried, What's that you say? I found you in a stick of bamboo, and you were no bigger than a poppy seed, and I have brought you up until you stand as tall as I. Who is going to take my child away? Do you think I'll let them? He added, If they do, it will kill me. His distraught weeping was really unbearable to behold. Kaguya Hime said, I have a father and a mother who live in the city of the moon. When I came here from my country, I said it would be just for a short while, but already I have spent many years in this land. I have tarried among you, without thinking of my parents on the moon, and I have become accustomed to your ways. Now that I am about to return, I feel no great joy, but only terrible sadness. And yet this, though it is not by my choice, I must go. They both wept uncontrollably. Her maids, who had been in her service for years, thought how unspeakable parting would be, and how much they would miss her noble and lively disposition, to which they had grown so familiar. They refused all nourishment and grieved no less than the others. When the emperor learned what had occurred, he sent a messenger to the bamboo cutter's house. The old man went out to receive him, weeping profusely. His beard had turned white from sorrow, his back was bent, and his eyes were swollen. He was just 50 this year, but his troubles seemed to have aged him suddenly. The imperial messenger transmitted the emperor's words. I am informed that you have been afflicted by grave misfortune. Is it true? The bamboo cutter, weeping, answered the message. On the night of the full moon, men are coming from the city of the moon to fetch Kaguya Hime. I am deeply honored by His Majesty's kind enquiry, and beg him to send soldiers here on that night to catch anyone who may arrive from the moon. The messenger departed, and after reporting to the emperor on the old man's condition, repeated his request. The emperor said, If I, who had but a single glimpse of Kaguya Hime, cannot put her from my thoughts, what must it be like for her parents, who are used to seeing her day and night, to lose her? Okay, so the emperor feels empathy for the parents who have lost their daughter. On the 15th, the day of the full moon, okay, remember that the full moon comes at the 15th of every lunar solar calendar month in the old calendar. On the 15th, the day of the full moon, the emperor issued orders to the different guards' headquarters, and designating as his official envoy the junior commandant of the palace guards, Taika no Okuni, sent a force of some 2,000 men from the 6 headquarters to the bamboo cutter's house. No sooner did they arrive than 1,000 men posted themselves on the wall and 1,000 on the roof. Together with the numerous members of the household, they formed a defense that left no openings. The defenders were equipped with bows and arrows, and inside the main house, the women folk were stationed, guarding it. Okay, so they're going to mount a defense against the moon people who are trying to take Kaguya Hime back to her home. The old woman sat in the strong room of the house, holding Kaguya Hime in her arms. The old man, having tightly barred the door, stood on guard at the entrance. He declared, Do you think anybody, even if he comes from the moon, is going to break through our defenses? He called to the roof, Shoot to kill if you see anything flying in the sky, no matter how small. The guards answered, With defenses as strong as ours, we're sure we can shoot down even a mosquito. We'll expose its body as a warning to the others. Their words greatly reassured the old man. Kaguya-hime said, "No matter how you lock me up and try to guard me, you won't be able to resist the men from the moon. You won't be able to use your weapons on them. Even if you shut me up in this room, when they come, everything will open before them. Resist them though you may. When they come, even the bravest man will lose heart. If anyone comes after you, I'll tear out his eyes with my long nails," cried the old man. "I'll grab him by the hair and throw him to the ground. I'll put him to shame by exposing his behind for all the officers to see," he shouted with anger. "Don't talk in such a loud voice," cautioned Kaguya-hime. "It would be shocking if the men on the roof heard you. I am very sorry to leave you without ever having expressed my gratitude for all your kindness. It makes me sad to think that fate did not permit us to remain together for long, and I must soon depart. Surely you know it will not be easy for me to leave without ever having shown in the least my devotion to you, my parents. When I have gone outside and have sat looking at the moon, I have always begged for just one more year with you, but my wish was refused. That was what made me so unhappy. It breaks my heart to leave you after bringing you such grief. The people of the moon are extremely beautiful, and they never grow old, nor have they any worries." Okay, so they have immortality over there on the moon, unlike the humans here on Earth. And notice that she shows filial piety toward her parents here on Earth and would prefer to stay with them, even though she wants to go home and people on the moon want her to return home. She would rather, if she had her way, stay here on Earth for a few more years, but she, alas, cannot do so. Nor have they any worries. Yet I am not at all happy to be returning. I know I shall miss you and keep wishing I could be looking after you when they are old and helpless." She spoke in tears. "Don't talk of such heart-rending things," the old man exclaimed. "No matter how beautiful this people may be, I won't let them stand in my way." His tone was bitter. By now the evening had passed. About midnight the area of the house was suddenly illuminated by a light more dazzling than that of the high noon, a light as brilliant as 10 full moons put together, so bright one could see the pores of a man's skin. Then down from the heavens men came riding on clouds and arrayed themselves at a height some 5 feet above the ground. Okay, this is a very Buddhist image of men striding down Nyorai, sort of ethereal, otherworldly Bosatsu and Nyorai and so forth, coming down to earth, riding on clouds. The guards inside and outside the house, seemingly victims of some supernatural spell, quite lost their will to resist. At length they plucked up the courage and tried to ready their bows and arrows, but the strength had gone from their hands and their bodies were limp. Some valiant men among them, with great effort, tried to shoot their bows, but the arrows glanced off harmlessly in all directions. Unable to fight boldly like soldiers, they could only watch, stupefied. Words cannot describe the beauty of the raiment worn by the men who hovered in the air. With them they had brought a flying chariot covered by a parasol of gauzy silk. One among them, apparently their king, called out, "Miyakomaro, come here." The old man, who had assumed such an air of defiance, prostrated himself before the stranger, feeling as if he were in a drunken stupor. The king said, "You childish old man, we sent the young lady down into the world for a short while, in return for some trifling good deeds you had performed, and for many years we had bestowed riches on you, until you are now like a different man." Kaguya-hime was obliged to live for a time in such humble surroundings because of a sin she had committed in the past. The term of her punishment is over. So she was being punished by being sent from the moon to earth. He was being rewarded for his good deeds in the past by receiving this celestial being from the moon, but it corrupted him. Right? Her presence over the years has corrupted him, made him rich and not as humble as he used to be. Was obliged to live because of a sin she had committed in the past. The term of her punishment is over, and we have come, as you can see, to escort her home. No matter how you weep and wail, old man, you cannot detain her. Send her forth at once. I have been watching over Kaguya-hime for more than 20 years, the old man answered. You speak of her having come down into this world for a short while. It makes me wonder if you are not talking about some other Kaguya-hime living in a different place. He added, besides, the Kaguya-hime I have here is suffering from a serious illness and cannot leave her room. Alright, so the moon people regard 20 years as a very short time for punishment, and he, of course, is a human, and 20 years is a long time for a human. No answer met his words. Instead, the king guided the flying chariot to the roof, where he called out, "Kaguya-hime, why have you lingered such a long time in this filthy place?" The door of the strong room flew open, and the lattice-work shutters opened of their own accord. The old woman had been clutching Kaguya-hime in her arms, but now the girl freed herself and stepped outside. The old woman, unable to restrain herself, could only look up to heaven and weep. Kaguya-hime approached the bamboo cutter, who lay prostrate, weeping in his bewilderment. "It is not by my own inclination that I leave you now," she said. "Please at least watch as I ascend to the sky." "How can I watch you go when it makes me so sad? You are abandoning me to go up to heaven, not caring what may happen to me. Take me with you." He threw himself down, weeping. Kaguya-hime was at a loss what to do. She said, "Before I go, I shall write a letter for you. If ever you long for me, take out the letter and read it." In tears she wrote these words. Now she writes a letter of parting for him. "Had I but been born in this world, I should have stayed with you and never caused you any grief. To leave this world and part from you is quite contrary to my wishes. Please think of this cloak that I leave with you as a memento of me." Okay, remember at the end of the Baijōi Chonghanga, Song of Unending Sorrow, they end with exchanging these mementos, and I have a feeling that the author of this Taketori Monogatari was familiar with Chonghaga's very influential, seminal, important poem, and we see a sort of parallels with it here, with the story of Yang here. "On nights when the moon shines in the sky, gaze at it well." They say the same thing at the end of that poem, you'll remember. "Now that I am about to forsake you, I feel as though I must fall from the sky, pulled back to this world by my longing for you." Okay, longing, shuchaku, right, which is something you have to get rid of in according to the Buddhist ideas. Some of the celestial beings had brought boxes with them. One contained a robe of feathers. So here's the hagoromo, robe of feathers. Another, an elixir of immortality, right? A Taoist elixir of immortality. So we have Taoist elements here mixed with the Buddhist elements. "Please take some of the elixir in this jar," said a celestial being to Kaguya-hime. "You must be feeling unwell after the things you have had to eat in this dirty place." He offered her the elixir, and Kaguya-hime tasted a little. Then, thinking she might leave a little as a remembrance of herself, she started to wrap some of the elixir in the cloak she had discarded when a celestial being prevented her. He took the robe of feathers from its box and attempted to throw it over her shoulders, but Kaguya-hime cried out, "Wait just a moment. They say that once you put on this robe, your heart changes, and there are still a few words I must say." She wrote another letter. Okay, so your heart changes, you are transformed spiritually, mentally, psychologically when you put on this hagoromo robe. We'll talk about the significance of this robe in more detail in class. She wrote another letter. The celestial beings called impatiently, "It's late." "Don't talk so unreasonably," exclaimed Kaguya-hime. With perfect serenity, she gave the letter to someone for delivery to the emperor. She showed no signs of agitation. The letter said, "Although you graciously deigned to send many people to detain me here, my escorts have come and will not be denied. Now they will take me with them, to my bitter regret and sorrow. I am sure you must find it quite incomprehensible, but it weighs heaviest on my heart that you may consider my stubborn refusal to obey your commands an act of disrespect." To the above, she added this verse, and she writes her final waka poem for the emperor. "Ima wa tote, ama no hagoromo, kiru orizo, kimi o aware to omoi ide keru." Now that the moment has come to put on the heavenly robe of feathers, the hagoromo, ama no hagoromo, my longing thoughts are with my lord. Kaguya-hime attached to the letter some elixir of immortality from the jar. Summoning the commander of the guards, directed him to offer it to the emperor. A celestial being took the gift from her hands and passed it to the commander. No sooner had the commander accepted the elixir than the celestial being put the robe of feathers on Kaguya-hime. At once she lost all recollection of the pity and grief she had felt for the old man. Right, so she immediately, to this a kind of a symbol for transmigration, I think. When she puts on the hagoromo, she immediately forgets all of her experiences in this on Earth over these last 20 years. No cares afflict anyone who puts on this robe, and Kaguya-hime in all tranquility, so she's kind of attained enlightenment or nirvana, or returned to it. Kaguya-hime in all tranquility climbed into her chariot and ascended into the sky, accompanied by a retinue of 100 celestial beings. The old man and woman shed bitter tears, but to no avail. When her letter was read to them, they cried, "Why should we cling to our lives? For whose sake? All is useless now." They refused to take medicine and never left their sick beds again. The commander returned to the palace with his men. He reported in detail the reasons why he and his men had failed with their weapons to prevent Kaguya-hime from departing. He also presented the jar of elixir with the letter attached. The emperor felt much distressed when he opened the letter and read Kaguya-hime's words. He refused all nourishment and permitted no entertainments in his presence. Later, the emperor summoned his ministers and great nobles and asked them which mountain was closest to heaven. This is the part about Mount Fuji, right? Where Mount Fuji gets his name from this final episode in the story, in Taketori Monogatari. One man replied, "The mountain in the province of Suruga." All right, the province of Suruga is today Shizuoka. It is near both to the capital and to heaven. Obviously, the tallest mountain and the highest mountain in Japan. The emperor thereupon wrote the following poem: "Ao koto mo namida ni ukabu wagami ni wa shinanu kusuri mo nanika wa senmu." For anyone awash in tears with no hope of meeting again, what use is an elixir to stave off death? All right, so what use is this kusuri, this elixir, to stave off death when the prolongment of life without his love just will cause endless sorrow? He gave the poem, and again, endless sorrow, Changhanga echoes there. He gave the poem and the jar containing the elixir to a messenger with the command that he take them to the summit of the mountain in Suruga, to Mount Fuji. He directed that the letter and the jar be placed side by side, set on fire, and allowed to be consumed in the flames. The men, obeying his command, climbed the mountain, taking with them a great many soldiers. Ever since they burned the elixir of immortality on the summit, people have called the mountain by the name Fuji, meaning immortality. So today we write the word Fuji with different Chinese characters, but initially, according to the story, and it's probably true, it was written Fu-shi, shi na zaru, right? Shinu koto naku. By the name Fuji, meaning immortal, never dying, not dying, Fu-shi. Even now, the smoke is still said to rise into the clouds. All right, that's the end of the story, adapted from a translation by Don Kim. All right, and we'll discuss this in more detail in class. I will see you then.